Gavin, an ordinary office worker, was looking forward to a quiet retirement when a high school reunion took an unexpected turn. As he caught up with old friends, he witnessed a surprising moment that changed someone's life forever. My name is Gavin. I'm an ordinary office worker who just turned 60 this year. While I hold the position of department head, I'm starting to think it might be time to step down soon. As for my family, I have a wife of the same age and two daughters. Both daughters are married with children, and now I have four grandchildren. My life is quite ordinary, but I'm confident that I'll have a happy retirement. At this age, I don't expect any major changes in the direction of my life. I think many people feel the same way. Of course, I'm one of them, and while I haven't accomplished anything monumental, I'm satisfied with my life as it is. If I can spend my remaining years in peace, that would be the greatest happiness. That's what I believe. However, it seems that the catalyst for a major change in life can appear in the most unexpected places. In my case, it was a high school reunion that involved my close relationships. In the summer of the year I turned 60, I received an invitation to a high school reunion. Thinking back, I vaguely remember talking about holding reunions with my friend when we were younger, but I never expected it to actually happen so many years after. In fact, I had completely forgotten about it. Still, I was very interested in reconnecting with old friends after so many years, and I really wanted to attend. My wife also encouraged me to go, so I decided to attend the reunion. However, at that time, I had no idea that something completely unexpected was about to happen. When I arrived at the venue, it seemed I was quite early. There was only one other person there. I can't remember this person. It's been so long that there's no way I could recognize them just by their face. Hey, it's been a long time. I'm Gavin. When I nervously called out, the other person responded, Ah, I'm Nate. It's been a while. Nate. Hearing that name, I felt old, unpleasant memories rushing back to me. Nate and I were in the same class. He was a perfect all-rounder in both academics and sports, and even served as student council president. He was good-looking too, so he was very popular with the girls. But among the guys, he was extremely disliked. The reason was, Hey, Gavin, give me that paper. This one? One morning, as I arrived at school, took my seat, and held my homework worksheet, Nate asked me that. In a half-forced manner, Nate snatched the worksheet from my hands. He then erased my name from the name field with an eraser and wrote his own name over it. What are you doing? Shut up. A runt like you should just do as I say. Whether you bring your homework or not, your pathetic grades won't change anyway. Nate was the kind of guy who always pushed people around to get his way. Everyone knew it was wrong, but he was popular and had a lot of influence at school. I felt powerless to stand up to him. He treated most of the boys like this, but it seemed like I was his favorite target. He'd make me do pointless tasks, throw away my lunch, and even take my money sometimes. But he was smart about it. He never left any evidence, and he kept his status until we graduated. After high school, we went to different colleges, and I heard he was studied abroad. He was the last person I wanted to see again, but here we were, crossing paths after all these years. Oh well, we were both getting older. I wanted to believe the childish bullying was behind us. But the fear he'd planted in me so long ago still made me tense up without thinking. It's been a while. How have you been? Despite my tension, Nate said this with a smile, which put me at ease. Time really does heal all wounds, or so I thought. But that was my mistake. Just kidding. I wish I could say that, but who are you again? Gavin, right? Unfortunately, I don't really remember people who didn't make much of an impression on me. In the empty venue with just the two of us, Nate's voice echoed loudly. I felt the unpleasant sensation of sweat in my clenched palms, something I hadn't felt in decades. This man hadn't changed, no matter how much time had passed. And just as much, I hadn't changed either. I tried to laugh it off without saying anything back. And then somebody entered the venue. "Hey, Gavin. Long time no see." I turned to look. Standing there was an older man, now difficult to recognize due to the passage of time. But somehow, I knew who he was. After all, only one person ever reached out to me like this in high school. "Troy, is that you?" When I called out the name that came to mind. "Yeah, it's me. It's been a while." He came over to me and naturally pulled me away from Nate. Just like in high school, Troy was always there to kindly reach out to me when I was down and couldn't stand up to Nate. Those memories, buried deep in my mind, started flooding back. Watching Troy and me, Nate laughed and said, "Ah, now I remember. You two were that sad pair, always pretending to be friends, even though you were both so dull and pathetic. You haven't changed at all. You must have lived a pretty low-life existence. As for me, I'm the CEO of a successful company with status and fame. It's like we're in completely different worlds. I never thought, at this stage in life, that I'd still care about winning or losing to someone." But hearing that sarcasm again, I couldn't help but feel a bit frustrated and even a little pathetic. I've never been one to talk back. Troy was the same. Kind-hearted, never one to argue or fight. Instead, we'd quietly walk away from Nate and try to brush off the negativity together. Some things hadn't changed over the years. Just as I was thinking that, Troy spoke up. "I don't really see life as having levels. Everyone's on their own path, so there's no need to compare." Troy calmly responded, catching me by surprise. It seemed Nate was just as taken aback, but he quickly retorted, "People living at the bottom have to justify themselves like that. Otherwise, they'd feel so miserable they'd want to die. I heard you didn't even finish high school, Troy. You probably don't have a real job either." Nate had always been good at stabbing people with words like this. But Troy seemed different from how he was back then. "I don't know what you consider a real job. I believe I fulfilled all my duties until I recently retired." Troy said this with pride. But Nate continued, "You're retired already? That sounds like you got pushed out early. Just goes to show how worthless you are. Stop pretending to be something you're not." With the same mocking smile, Nate said this. But when the other classmates arrived, the conversation ended there. In the past, I would have just felt frustrated, but now, it's different. Thanks to Troy, I felt a bit more at ease. From then on, it was just an ordinary and enjoyable reunion. Everyone had aged so much that it was hard to recognize who was who until we introduced ourselves. But as the drinks flowed and the evening went on, we gradually started to regain our old feelings. At first, it brought back some old wounds, but in the end, I was glad I came. Troy and I ended up sitting next to each other after the event began, so we talked about what had happened in our lives during the time we hadn't seen each other. Work stories, family stories. We were never the talkative type, but after all those years apart, the conversation never stopped. Troy had changed in many ways, including being able to stand up to Nate, but his fundamentally kind and gentle nature was just as it had been in high school. That gave me a sense of relief. As the reunion was wrapping up, Nate, clearly drunk and feeling bold, started bragging loudly about his so-called heroic stories. Even though he was sitting far from Troy and me, he couldn't let go of the earlier incident, and kept throwing comments our way. "I'm now the owner of a top-tier hotel. You all definitely know the name. I was exceptional from a young age, so I think everyone expected me to accomplish something big, you know? It must be a proud moment for you as my former classmate, seeing me achieve even more than expected, right? Hey, Troy." He could boast on his own, but he just had to drag me into it. "Yeah, it's impressive." Troy shows the composure to genuinely acknowledge it. Maybe Nate didn't like that attitude because he kept piling on the sarcasm. But just because we're classmates doesn't mean I can give you any special treatment. My hotel's out of reach for poor folks like you, and I can't offer any discounts. It's a place only the right kind of elite can afford to stay at. But even then, Troy did not waver. I see. Got it. That's all he said. I couldn't help but wonder, how did Troy develop such strong resolve? Annoyed that Troy didn't take the bait, Nate started talking about more shady things. You can't reach the top of the industry by just doing regular business. Can you even imagine how I climbed up here with your limited brains? He looked around at our puzzled faces with satisfaction. Then, he said something he really shouldn't have. You hide it. Information like financial management doesn't get out unless you spill it. As long as you hide it well, tax evasion or whatever else is easy. Only those smart enough to live like that can climb to the top. You guys don't have the guts for that, do you? That's why you're stuck being ordinary poor folks. Nate, with a bright red, drunken face, talked about these things with such glee. The other classmates just listened, looking taken aback. He's really telling some wild stories, I muttered to Troy. And then, I realized something. Once I noticed, there was no way I could stay silent, so I stood up right away. Nate, you really need to drop it. I could feel the blood draining from my face in response to the unexpected situation. But I don't think anyone around could guess why I was so panicked. Except for Troy, who was standing next to me. Still, Nate ignored me and continued to boast about all the bad things he'd done. Is it too much for you to handle? Feeling out of your depth? Pathetic. Instead of stopping, he just kept getting more carried away. But the situation was far more serious than that. I had no intention of condoning criminal acts, nor did I want to defend Nate, who had caused me so much trouble since high school. But the more he talked, the more I started to sweat. I couldn't take it anymore, so I cut him off and shouted, Nate, Troy was a high-ranking police officer. You really don't want to keep this up. My words echoed through the room, and everything fell silent. Even Nate, who had been talking so cheerfully, went pale. He clearly realized the seriousness of saying all this in front of someone connected to the police. Then Troy, who was standing next to me, stood up tall and said, like I said earlier, I've always taken pride in my work and fulfilled my duties with honor. That pride hasn't changed, even after I retired. There's no way I can stay silent after hearing about such corruption. I'll have to take the appropriate action. Troy grabbed his things and started to leave. Nate, with a desperate look, followed him as if the previous attitude had been a lie. Wait, we were classmates, right? Besides, it was just a joke to liven up the atmosphere. So please, let it slide, I'm begging you. But Troy responded, just because we're classmates doesn't mean I can give you special treatment. You said that yourself. Whether it was a lie or not, it'll be clear once it's investigated. I'm leaving now. And as Troy walked away, Nate collapsed to the ground. Damn it. Damn it all, he shouted, a sound that was painful to hear. Later on, Nate's company was raided by the police. As he had so proudly boasted, evidence of tax evasion was found, and he was arrested. I heard about this when I met Troy a few days later. That's when I asked him something that had been on my mind for a while. I wanted to know how Troy had developed such strong resolve. I was genuinely surprised when I first heard that Troy, who hadn't been much of a student, had become an officer in the police department. I was really curious about what had happened after he graduated from high school. And the answer was something I never expected. Back in high school, when you were being bullied, I was too weak to stand up for you. I was ashamed of myself for not helping. I had no direction, no dreams for the future. After graduation, I left home and just drifted around. I was practically homeless. Then one day, a police officer approached me. Talking to him made me realize I wanted to be strong, to be the kind of officer who stands up against injustice. That's when I decided, next time, I'd be the one to protect my friends when they were in trouble. So in a way, Gavin, I have you to thank for that. No, That's a bit of an exaggeration. If anything, I need to toughen up a bit myself. Maybe I should teach you some self-defense next time. Can't have you getting mugged. Knowing that a friend who's been close to me for all these years still cares, even after decades, filled me with happiness. I used to believe that by the time we reached our 60s, our lives wouldn't change much. But I was wrong. The paths we've taken over the years have led us in different directions, for better or worse. And that's likely to be true at 70, 80, or beyond. So from now on, even if my journey is simple, I'll walk it with pride and without regret. Reuniting with an old friend reminded me of that.